Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Ladner with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and I want to welcome you to our second webinar and as part of the Growing Strong Together series, focused on workforce-related topics specific to Kansas agriculture and employers. And I'm going to turn the webinar over now to Wendy.
Thank you, Dana, and good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy Mojo, and I serve as the State Monitor Advocate for the Kansas Department of Commerce. And in my role, I support and advocate for strong services to our agricultural employers. I appreciate you taking time this morning to join our webinar focused on worker protection standards and workplace safety. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, all participants' microphones will be muted by the meeting host. Second, if you have a question, please utilize the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring the chat and will address questions at the end of the presentation. And lastly, this session is being recorded and will be made available online next week. Now, I'd like to introduce Jordan Gallagher. Jordan is the FIFRA Worker Protection Coordinator for EPA Region 7. Jordan's work includes providing compliance assistance to agricultural employers, engaging with ag stakeholders, and promoting occupational pesticide safety. Jordan, I will now turn it over to you to share your presentation. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Jordan. I am the FIFRA Worker Protection Coordinator for EPA Region 7. And today we're going to be talking about the FIFRA Worker Protection Standard and how to comply with this standard while also promoting workplace safety. So a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be doing just an introductory presentation on what is WPS, going over some of the major high points of this standard, but we're not going to be going through an all-encompassing presentation, just a good introduction to get us started. We're going to be talking about requirements for employers, and then we're going to be talking about the application exclusion zone, which is a rule that had some changes in the past few years. So we're going to go over those changes. And then we're going to talk about updates to pesticide labeling under the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act of 2022. And then we are going to be wrapping it up with some compliance assistance resources. So let's start with what is the Worker Protection Standard. This is a federal regulation that's intended to protect workers and their families from pesticide exposure, injuries, and poisonings. So this is under the authority of FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and it offers occupational protections for both agricultural workers and pesticide handlers. So an agricultural worker is going to be someone who's working at an ag establishment, such as a farm, nursery, or greenhouse, working in the fields doing tasks like watering, hand labor, weeding, and things like that. And then a pesticide handler is someone who is either performing a pesticide application, assisting in an application, or they could be doing something like working on application equipment. So in Kansas, WPS is enforced through the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Pesticide and Fertilizer Program. So they're going to be doing the majority of WPS inspections and enforcement, and then EPA comes in to provide support when necessary. The goals of WPS are to inform, protect, and mitigate. So the main goal of this standard is to make sure that we're keeping our ag workforce safe and healthy. So when does WPS apply? So WPS applies during the use of a WPS labeled pesticide product on an ag establishment directly related to the production of an agricultural plant. So what this means is if you're at an ag establishment like a farm, nursery, or greenhouse, and you're using a pesticide that has this agricultural use requirements box, which is on the right, and you're employing workers and handlers on your establishment, WPS is going to apply to you. This applies whether or not the product is conventional or organic. Now, there are some pesticide uses that are considered non-ag uses. Those are not covered under this standard. So this is strictly for agriculture. So if you're trying to figure out if WPS applies to you, I would recommend going to pesticideresources.org. They have this WPS questionnaire which walks you through a few different questions to help you determine if this applies to your establishment. But if you go through this and you're still confused, you can always reach out to me and I'm happy to help you. So we're going to start with pesticide safety training requirements. This is a big one. Employers are required under the standard to provide workers and handlers with EPA-approved pesticide safety training before they begin their work. This training must be provided once a year. Their training must be an EPA-approved training. It must be provided in a manner that employees will understand, and it must be performed by a qualified trainer. So in addition to that, employers must also keep records of trainings for 2 years, and these records include the trained worker's name and signature, the date of training, information identifying which EPA-approved training materials were used. So that's going to be the EPA approval number that will be on the training, the trainer's name and certification information, and the ag employer's name. In addition, these training records must be provided to employees upon request. Another requirement under WPS is the central posting requirement. So the central posting and pesticide safety training are two of the most common violations that we see in WPS, which is why I wanted to make sure we spend time on these today. So the central posting is where workers and handlers can go to see what products are being used at the establishment. So employers must inform workers where the central posting is, and the central posting must contain the following. So you can see the picture on the right. We have number 1 is hazard information. So that's going to be our safety data sheets. Number 2 is our pesticide application records. And number 3 is a WPS safety poster. So the safety data sheets and application records must be displayed within 24 hours of the application and before workers enter a treated field. This information must remain posted for 30 days after the REI expires. So here's another example of what a central posting may look like. Again, we have our safety data sheets, and then we have pesticide application records. So this is going to include the product name, EPA registration number, and active ingredient, the crop or site treated, the location and description of the treated area, the date and times of the pesticide application, and the duration of the REI, which we'll go over that in the next slide. And then the safety information, which is the WPS safety poster. This is going to include the name, address, and phone number of the nearest emergency medical facility, as well as contact information for the state or tribal pesticide regulatory agency. So again, if you're in Kansas, that regulatory agency is going to be KDA. Also with WPS, we have entry restrictions. So I mentioned the REI on the last slide. So the REI stands for restricted entry interval. This means the time after the end of a pesticide application during which entry into the treated area is restricted. So each pesticide product is going to have its own REI. So that's why it's really important to read the label for what you're applying so you know how long the REI is going to be. Employers are responsible for ensuring that workers and handlers stay out of treated areas during an REI, and employers must notify workers of all entry restrictions. So that notification is either going to be posted or verbal. So this picture on the right is an example of what that posted notification is going to look like. A posted notification is going to be a warning sign that must be posted at any reasonable entrance to the treated area and must remain posted for the duration of the REI. And as long as these warning signs are up, workers may not enter the treated area. And then you can notify your workers through verbal notification if the label does not require the signs to be posted and the REI is less than or equal to 4 hours for indoor applications or less than or equal to 48 hours for outdoor applications. So now we're going to talk about decontamination and emergency assistance. So this is really important in the case of an accidental exposure. So employers must provide decontamination supplies under the following conditions. If the REI is greater than 4 hours, supplies must be provided for 30 days. If it's less than or equal to 4 hours, supplies must be provided for 7 days. These supplies must be within a quarter mile of all workers and handlers, and they include clean water for eye flushing or washing the skin, soap, and single-use towels. So one thing that's important to note is that things like hand sanitizer or like a wet towel, like moist towels, wipes, are not they do not meet this requirement. It must be clean water and a single-use towel. And this includes 1 gallon of water per worker and 3 gallons of water per handler. Now, for handlers, you're also going to need a clean change of clothes in case the PPE or clothing become contaminated during an application. Employers must provide immediate transportation to a medical facility in the case of a pesticide exposure, and then also provide medical personnel with information about the exposure, what happened, and what products the employee was exposed to. So now we're going to talk briefly about the application exclusion zone. Like I mentioned earlier, this rule has kind of gone back and forth a little bit in the past few years and was recently updated in 2024. So I'm going to go over those updates and what the application exclusion zone is. So this is an area surrounding the pesticide application equipment that must be generally free of all persons. So this area moves with the application equipment, kind of like a halo. So if you see the picture in the top right, it's an imaginary halo around the application equipment, and no one is allowed to be within that area. So this is either going to be 25 or 100 feet, depending on the type of pesticide application and the droplet size. So on the right, we have a chart that helps determine how large your AEZ is going to be. It's going to be 100 feet if you're applying aerially by air blast, fumigant, smoke, mist, or fog, or ground-based sprays with droplet sizes smaller than medium. It's going to be 25 feet for ground-based sprays with medium or larger droplet sizes. And then you're not going to have an AEZ if you're using any other method, such as like a granular pesticide or a soil incorporated pesticide that's not a fumigant. Or if you're spraying less than 12 inches from the soil surface or planting medium, then you're not going to have an AEZ. One thing that I'll note is the AEZ is only for outdoor applications. Indoor applications have their own set of entry restrictions. And if you're curious about that, I'm happy to answer any questions about those. So with our AEZ, we have additional restrictions. So we have the keep out restriction, which means that employers must keep people out of AEZs on the establishment, including anyone in easements. The only exception for this is trained and equipped handlers that are involved in the application. And then we have the suspension restriction, which means that handlers must suspend applications whenever anyone is within the AEZ. This is regardless of whether those people are on or off the establishment and regardless of if they're in an easement. So for example, if a handler is applying a pesticide and there's someone on the side of the road, like in a car, they have to suspend that application if they're within that AEZ, either 25 or 100-foot radius. And they may only resume that application once those people have left the AEZ. Now, once the application is over, the AEZ ceases to exist, and those post-application entry restrictions that we talked about, the REI, are going to go into effect. So like I said, we're not doing a full all-encompassing presentation on WPS, just an introduction, but I did want to mention these additional protections under WPS. We have the anti-retaliation clause, which states that employers may not retaliate against a worker or handler who attempts to comply with the WPS, file a complaint, or provide information in an investigation of alleged WPS noncompliance. And then we also have the do not contact statement, which is on all ag use pesticide labels, which states that pesticides must not be applied in a way that will contact workers or other persons, either directly or through drift. So next, we're going to talk about the updates to pesticide labeling under PREA 5, which is the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act of 2022. So this requires that certain portions of pesticide product labels be translated into Spanish. So you may have already been seeing some changes to pesticide labels. We had the first deadline for this on December 29th of 2025, and that deadline was for restricted use pesticides in agricultural products with an acute toxicity category of 1. So you may have already started to see some of these changes. These translations must appear on the pesticide product container, or they must be provided through a hyperlink or readily accessible electronic method like a QR code. So why is this important? So this is an effort to foster better understanding and compliance with label instructions. So say that you're Spanish speaking or your workers or handlers are Spanish speaking. This is a way to help foster better understanding with those label requirements. So if you're interested in seeing what sections of these pesticide product labels must be translated, you can visit our website to see our Spanish translation guide, which goes over everything that must be translated. And I have a list here of the different sections. So these mostly have to do with the safety and health portions of the label. But again, you can see a full breakdown at our Spanish translation guide, and I'll add all of these links to the chat after the presentation. Accessing Spanish labels is a really important aspect of this. So ensuring that those Spanish-speaking workers and handlers have access to Spanish labels is a great way to foster compliance with those label directions. So these Spanish labels can be found either on the product container, where there's either going to be the Spanish text or a web link or QR code that will lead to the Spanish text. Or they can also be found via web access. So labels with Spanish sections will be added to the pesticide product label system, PPLS, and I've linked the website here. So this is EPA's website for searching for all registered pesticide products. And then as those products are submitted to EPA with the Spanish sections, they'll be added to PPLS. So instructions for accessing these labels and using PPLS can be found at our website, which again, I will add to the chat after the presentation. So this is what PPLS looks like, and we've recently made some updates. Everything in red is Spanish subheadings that we've added recently to help prepare for when these Spanish labels are added and help accommodate people who are Spanish speaking. So this system, you can search for a product via the EPA registration number, the distributor product number. You can also search by the product or brand name, and then find that label that you're looking for. So how does this all tie together? Remember, we talked about the central posting in the beginning of the presentation. Employers are required to post the EPA registration number and product name, which we saw on the previous slide is what you can use to search for a product in PPLS. So then the employees can utilize this safety information that's posted by their employer to search for the Spanish labels. So they can either take a picture or write down the registration number or product name, and then go home and look up these labels and get a good understanding of what's being used at the establishment and how to keep themselves safe and healthy. So I do want to finish with some compliance assistance resources. First, I have the Pesticide Educational Resources Collaborative, also known as PERC. This is a really great website for anything compliance assistance. There's that WPS questionnaire, which I showed in the beginning of the presentation. This is also where you can find EPA-approved pesticide safety trainings, as well as take a course to become qualified to train your own employees. We also have the EPA How to Comply manual, which walks you through how to comply with every aspect of WPS. There's also the AEZ interim guidance, which helps you determine what size of AEZ you're going to have during an application. And it also has some example scenarios on there, which are really helpful. And then, like I said, since we didn't go through everything WPS today, I have linked 40 CFR Part 170, which is the entire regulation. If you're interested in some light reading, you can go look that up. But you can also always email me with questions that you have when it comes to WPS. I'm happy to answer anything. I know we're going to have some Q&A today, but if you think of something later on, please feel free to reach out. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. I actually have a question for you. What's the difference between an agricultural worker and a pesticide handler?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it depends on the type of work they're doing, if they're going to be classified as a worker or a handler. So, workers are not doing anything that has to do with the actual applications. They're not applying the pesticide, they're not helping out during a pesticide application. They're doing things like watering plants, picking, harvesting, and things like that. They're not actually using the pesticides, whereas a handler is going to be doing those tasks. And then that also determines what kind of training they're going to need. So a worker is only going to need to be trained on worker tasks, whereas a handler is going to have to go through a little bit of additional training because they're doing those application tasks.
Gotcha. Okay. And then how can employers again get qualified to train their employees?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, in order to train your employees, you need to be an approved trainer. So, you can do that by taking a Train the Trainer course, which I know K-State Extension offers those sometimes. We can also find a Train the Trainer course on the pesticideresources.org website that I mentioned. And or you can become qualified to train your employees if you are a certified pesticide applicator. So either a commercial or private applicator, you are then going to be qualified to train your employees.
And I do collaborate with some small farms. Are there any exceptions for small farms?
So there are no exceptions based on farm size. There are some exceptions for family farms, which I think I have a slide. Yeah, I have a slide on this in our appendix. So immediate family members, they still must follow label directions, but they're exempt from a lot of those WPS provisions. So immediate family members, we have a family tree here to kind of show what that means. But there are exceptions for family farms, but not, it doesn't depend on the size.
Okay, great. Well, I think that wraps up the questions that I was having throughout this session. I'm looking at chat, don't see anything
No,
else, Dana?
I do. I have a question, Jordan. We're getting close to spring break and students, maybe high school or college age students entering the workforce, maybe a little bit of shadowing, maybe followed up in May and June through the summer, helping out a number of careers, job opportunities, internships with maybe horticulture services or cooperatives with it. What are one or two things you would say to an ag employer that may be hiring on high school students or college age students in your world? What are a couple things you might mention to them if they have new workers joining their workforce for a temporary amount of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would really stress the importance of pesticide safety training. So not only is it required under WPS, but especially young people, they tend to think they're invincible. So the WPS safety training is going to give a really good overview of how they can keep themselves safe. Things like making sure that if you're working in a field, go wash your hands with soap and water before you get on your phone, things like that people don't typically think about. Or make sure you wash your hands before you go eat lunch. Make sure that you're paying attention to those posted warning signs and really being responsible and paying attention when you're at work, to keep yourself safe. And then one thing that the pesticide safety training covers that I think is really important is before you go home, and maybe before you even go, if it's a teenager, before you go hang out with your friends, change out of your work clothes, take a shower, and get those, first of all, so you don't, you're smelling nice, but so you're getting those residues off of your clothes and off of your skin so you're not spreading them to your friends and family as well. I think those are really good tips for anyone who's going to be working on a farm this summer.
Well, great. Jordan, do you want to go ahead and insert those links into the chat? You
Yes.
had
Going
talked
to
about adding those, so then that way we'll have those available to those that are online this morning. We appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Get those in here real quick.
There we go.
We'll give folks just a second if they want to copy those with it for your use. I appreciate that. And I don't see anything in the chat with it, Wendy or Jordan. So I think we'll wrap up. So on behalf of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, and the members of the Nurture Kansas Ag Collaborative Coalition, we want to thank you for your time this morning. And our next webinar will be next Wednesday, March 18th at 7 a.m. Thomas Eisenbarth with Grounded Ag will be presenting on retaining the next generation of our rural workforce. So we look forward to having you join us. And if you haven't registered, we'd love to have you go back to the KDA Workforce Development page and register for that webinar. We're really excited about that. It's a great addition to the two webinars we've already hosted. So, everybody, have a good day and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.